Hi, everybody. Welcome. This session we'll be talking about securing OpenSearch. Now, this particular session will go through a number of different items, and I hope it has a lot of hands-on value for you. First, I want to talk a little bit about the project, what this means for you, and then we'll do an overview of what security is about in OpenSearch, and then we'll talk about roles and access, and finally, how you can get involved if you want to contribute both to OpenSearch dashboards, or as well to the security features of OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards. So before we begin, let's go ahead and take a few minutes to just let you know a little bit about me. Um, my name is Kyle Davis. I look like this normally. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I have been complaining about my hair. I found out my barber is closing up. I haven't been there very often because I've been trying to, give myself home haircuts. But I'm one of those people that really pays a lot of attention to his appearance, especially when I go and meet folks. So when we do meet in person, I'm going to look a lot more like what you see on screen than what you're seeing in the playback right now. I hope we do meet, and the reason why I hope we do meet is I'm the senior developer advocate for OpenSearch at AWS. Now, I was hired for a slightly different project at AWS, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, what that means. But I'm super excited to be here talking a little bit about OpenSearch today. Now, one of the ways I like to kind of introduce myself is give you a few numbers about myself that you can help describe these things. It's better than reading off of a bullet point list. First, let's talk about 92. In this case, it's 1992, and that's the year that I really started seriously working on software and getting really interested in it. And at the time, I really thought the compilers were like the most interesting thing in the world. And instead of riding my bike and being a kid, I decided to write a compiler. And I released it in shareware. I hope, well, I say I hope I find it. I've never been able to find it. It's not on any of the discs that I retained at my dad's house, but it was released as shareware, and I hope that it kind of made its rounds and it may resurface one day. So this compiler was, probably pretty terrible in reference to now, but I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And ever since then, I've really been involved with software, and it's been a big part of my life for the majority of my life. So 241, maybe 242, that's the number of days I've been working at Amazon. Now, I say that because there's a lot of folks in this project that have been here forever, and I'm a relatively new joiner for a company like Amazon. And it came at a really interesting time. As I mentioned just a few seconds ago, I started uh, to work on a different project that eventually became OpenSearch, and originally worked with the Open Distro for Elasticsearch project, which we'll get to more specifics on what that means a little bit later. Three is the number of search engines I've worked with in my career. Um, uh, these are things that I've either participated in its development or worked with the community that surrounds it. So I worked with a number of Redis-based ones, the first two, and of course now I'm working with OpenSearch. And so I'm really glad to be working with OpenSearch. I think it's a really important project. 53. 53 is the parallel that I live at. I live at 53 North. That's Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. It is the northernmost city in Canada, and it's as cold as you might imagine. So it's a big part of my life, and a lot of times I share it in these presentations because it is a little bit unique. There's not a real tech scene here, but it's something to have a lot of fun with. Don't visit in the winter. It gets super cold, but the summers are wonderful. Um, Eight. Eight is the number of pounds my dog weighs. I have a small dog named Mr. Button. He's an Italian Greyhound, just a tiny little guy. He's about 12 years old too, so he's an old guy. But this dog is something that I talk a lot about on social media. I really have three topics that I talk about on social media. The first thing I talk about is search engines, of course. One of my hobbies as well is 3D printing, and then the third thing is my dog. So you'll see one of those three topics if you take a look at my Twitter timeline at any given time. So let's dive right in. You've heard enough about me. You probably didn't come to hear about me, and if you've wanted to hear all the OpenSearch presentations at this conference, you'll hear the same kind of introduction to me over and over again. So let's go right into the project. Now, the OpenSearch project is new. If you haven't heard of it, that's pretty much to be expected. If you have heard about it, you may have been reading news stories about it, or seeing kind of the the controversy that might surround it. But I want to kind of like step back a moment and talk a little bit about what it actually is and how it came about. So the formal definition, and I don't tend to read things off slides directly, but I do want to read this verbatim. OpenSearch is a community-driven open source search and analytics suite derived from the Apache 2 licensed Elasticsearch 7.10.2 and the Kibana 7.10.2. It consists of an a search engine daemon, OpenSearch, and a visualization and user interface, OpenSearch dashboard, as well as a series of functionality adding tools and plugins. So what does that all mean? Well, I want to highlight a few important words in this. Community driven is really important here. We're both open source and community driven. So what we're really saying there is our roadmap is really something that is driven by what the community puts forward. We don't have a secret roadmap that we're developing to suit our own needs. What we're really trying to do is kind of work backwards from what the community wants and deliver that to them. It's open source, and we'll talk a little bit more about the license later, but that is really important as well. And it's not something that we are trying to sell anything here. OpenSearch is available for everyone to use, and so we think that it really can have a huge impact. So the search engine daemon, it sits in the background and watches for search, and then the dashboards is the visualization and UI for that, and that correlates to the things that we forked as well. So let's step back and talk a little bit about that history here. So when I started with the Open Distro for Elasticsearch project, and that was a project that took the open source Elasticsearch and Kibana, and then added tools and plugins to it to add a lot of functionality to it, to really give those kind of table stakes features that people are looking for. Security being one of them. Earlier this year, Elasticsearch and Kibana had a license change. They're no longer Apache 2. They're no longer open source. So they're in a proprietary license that's not considered to be open source. So with that, the opportunity arose for us to continue the open source development of this type of software by forking. And so what happened after that is the team took time to go through that software and remove any other portions of it that were not licensed in the Apache 2 license. It was a mixed repo, so that you couldn't cleanly fork it. So that was a big thing where we had to go through every line of code and figure out what was Apache 2 and what wasn't. Then removing any type of extra stuff that was really only associated with the project that came before it. So anything that had to do with build tools, anything that had to do with analytic collection, a metric collection, or telemetry collection that was included in it, all that stuff had to be taken out. A lot of marketing stuff had to be taken out of it. And so now we're left with OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards, which are just clean places for the community to go forward with open source development of it. So that being said, what do you use it for? It's used for log, metric, and trace analytics. So this is the analytical side of it. And then the other side is for enterprise and general search. Now, from a perspective of, what's used more, this is the majority of users are using this for analytical workloads, but it certainly also fits for enterprise and general search. So what that means is we have two audiences to cater to, and you'll see some of these things will make more sense in many of these sessions for a search workload, and some will make sense for more of an analytical workload. With reference in this particular session, I think that security applies pretty equally to both workloads, so it makes a lot of sense. From a volume perspective, if you were to say, how many bytes we think people are going to use this for, um, it's going to go way lopsided for logs, metric, and trace data. Um, those analytical workloads are generally machine generated and they just have huge volumes of data, whereas search workloads are much smaller, but they still can be quite large. So that's just kind of how the lay of the land is there for it. This particular piece of software works great for both of these use cases. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is the Apache license and why we think it's really important. So the Apache license gives those who want to use this the ability to modify, extend, embed, and monetize, resell, and make a product or service. So it covers a whole wide range of uses. Um, with regards to licensing, you know, um, a lot of people have policies at their organizations that prevent them from using proprietary license by just blanket nature. But we also have people that maybe they have to have a lawyer review something. But the Apache license is really well understood. It's really well accepted. So there's none of that you have to deal with. So by having the Apache license on the software, it really gives people the ability to use it in any way they really want to and contribute back to it. So that's super important to us. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that we're pretty pure in this license. Anything that you use as part of the product will be licensed as Apache 2. The exception being the website, and that's BSD3 licensed. So the website is also open source and you can contribute to it, and we'd like you to. But its history is a little different, so it doesn't have the Apache 2 license. So again, we think this is super important, and I think this is one of the things that define the project. Let's talk a little bit about the status of the project. Um, Now, we announced this way back in January 2021. And we took a long time to kind of do those steps that I was describing a couple slides back, where the team at AWS was removing any type of ambiguous code as far as license is concerned, making sure that it's a clean place to start from. This is a very large code base, and some of the things were not clear. So we did take a while to get to the alpha release. So that is where we got to when we introduced it and gave the name to the world. Uh, Now on May 5th, I will admit that I am recording this previously to this actual presentation, so there is a bit of a crystal ball effect here. It may be a day or so shifted from there, but that's when Beta 1 came out. So by the time you're watching this, we'll be working on Beta 2. Then we'll move through and go to release candidate and finally to general availability. Now, what do these all mean? Alpha level was untested and new features could be added. Basically, it's very use at your own risk and it had no artifacts, right? Beta is still use at your own risk. It's untested, but the features are pretty much established at that point. Once we get to release candidate, it's going to be pretty much in the form that it's going to be for general availability. We're just confirming that everything works. And once we get to general availability, we hope that you use it in production workloads. So let's talk a little bit about just the general components here. OpenSearch is a distributed search engine daemon. What I mean by that is distributed in that it has the ability for the workload to be split across multiple pieces of infrastructure or virtualized infrastructure. So it's not limited to one piece of hardware. So that's really important for the data sizes that we're talking about. It's a daemon in that you're not actually interacting with it directly. I think that's actually a confusing part because a lot of people will see some of the other components of this particular piece of software and say, oh, I'm when I click on something in OpenSearch. Well, that's actually not a very accurate statement. You interact with it actually via REST API. So this is the kind of standard thing where you'd send an HTTP request or HTTPS request in this case. And you have your verb, so that will have meaning to it, put and patch and delete and so on and so forth. Those all have meaning that is instructed by the pathway that you're sending it to. And then there is a payload to it, which is a JSON payload. So those create the entire API that you'll be using. It performs indexing and storage of data, and really what's happening with that is the indexing is the primary thing, the reason this exists. Storage is kind of something that's there and it's a bonus, But I put indexing first here because the storage of data and indexing together makes you think database. Not really have the same, doesn't really have the same use case as a database. It has very different patterns as far as guarantees of data and consistency and and transaction ability. So it's very different. Its primary role is indexing, so finding things rather than storing things, but it can store things. It's built in Java using Lucene. Lucene is a long time um, library that was been around for decades, and it really has a lot of the core functionality of search in that. So we owe a lot to Lucene as far as the functionality is concerned. And since it's built on Java, it runs on the JVM. Let's talk a little bit about OpenSearch dashboards, which is kind of the other side of the equation, which is a browser-based UI and visualization platform for OpenSearch. It has built-in charts and tables so you can represent your data and not have to just look at JSON that's a little hard to read without it. You can compose charts and tables into dashboards, and that's one of the real use cases, and that's where the name comes from, because that's what we think a lot of folks will use this for, getting that at-a-glance look at their data that's coming in, and then being able to represent it in a way that's understandable by humans, despite the large volumes. You can interact with OpenSearch directly inside of this, so you can query it directly, or you can use dashboard's query language. It's built in TypeScript, and being built in TypeScript, it runs on a different runtime, of course, than OpenSearch. So it is in the kind of OpenSearch dashboards is in the Node.js runtime. So very different, and for that reason, these two projects are connected, but quite separate. So do keep in mind that there are two things here. So if you click on something in OpenSearch, you're clicking on dashboards. Now let's take a few minutes to talk about the overview and search capabilities. The security capabilities in OpenSearch. Before I do that, I do want to let you know kind of how this works. I mentioned it before, but I want to kind of go back to it. So the security features that we're going to be talking about today actually descend from OpenDistro. And you'll actually see OpenDistro in some of the APIs today. And that's okay. We're going to continue that forward. It doesn't break compatibility. So we think this is one of the most important plugins in the whole project, because really once you start understanding how security works, you can then build other plugins around it that follow the same security model. If you don't follow the same security model, gosh, that's going to be hard to be successful, right? So this is something that makes a lot of sense when you consider it to kind of be one of the things closest to the core. Not in the core, but it's closest to the core for understanding how OpenSearch works altogether. So this is going to give this overview. We're going to give like a kind of a very high level view, and then we'll go deeper when we talk a little bit about some more specific things about how access control works. So one of the first things that it does is provide TLS. So you can connect to OpenSearch via an HTTPS request. OpenSearch by itself does not have the encryption built into it. When you launch OpenSearch by itself, you'll have the demo certificates built into it. This gets you started on it, so you don't have to mess with any, getting your certificates right. This does have an impact on some of the things today, like they won't be, we were going to have some switches on the curl statements later on, so we're not, validating those certificates and things like that. So the demo certificates are only there to get you going. What it also does is provides the ability for nodes to talk to one another over TLS instead of in the clear. From an authentication standpoint, basically in this case, we're going to be we're going to use basic auth in these examples, but beyond that, there is the ability for it to integrate with all your different users and all these different ways of authenticating in. So it's really important to understand that it's not just something where you're going to manually manage these users. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the users kind of exist in a little bit of a separate, in a separation from the permissions which they have a little later. So that actually helps when you're integrating in these different services. So the security plugin also provides audit logging, and these track access and activity on the cluster. So basically, it tracks a number of different things that you would be thinking about. Is somebody doing this, and is there some unusual activity that's being on the actual cluster, not the data in the cluster? I think that gets people confused a lot. So it's generally tracking things like failed login. So that would be an example of like a user not existing. And so let's say that there is no user called Kyle, and you log in. That would be a failed login. Um, and then it tracks authentication. So if we're using basic auth, for example, um, you know, the user Kyle logs in with the wrong password. Um, then it looks at things like, privileges. When you're trying to access something you don't have privilege to, that's recorded. When privileges are granted as well. TLS issues, if you're trying to connect without security, when you're editing any of the security indices, or if you have header problems. So it really does kind of provide a comprehensive look of like things that might be a little bit strange to see. And so the other thing to look at is that you can actually store it in multiple different ways. So you can, of course, do it in a debugging way, standard out, or you can do it internal to OpenSearch or external to OpenSearch. So this will allow you to internal OpenSearch would be tracking this audit logging in OpenSearch itself in this instance, and external will be with an external uh, instance of OpenSearch. So that way you don't have to kind of have an inception where your audit logging is being recorded in their own system. Of course, there's also the ability to do webhook or log4j. And these things really help people understand what's going on with their clusters. So with that, I want to kind of get to one of the more comprehensive parts of this presentation, and that's going over kind of role and access control. Um, so I think this is the heart of understanding things. And to be honest with you, we have a lot of people, and this comes from this learning comes from observing people using Open Distro for many years. This is some of the parts of the system that are least well understood. And I hope that you kind of get a better head up on this. It can be complex, like any authorization and access control system can be. So let's first take a look at roles and users. So a user can have many users can have a role. So that means that there is one role that many users are assigned to. And a user can have many roles. So you're allowed to have multiple roles per user. Um, this is a source of confusion for a lot of folks. Because I think a lot of people would want to just say, okay, here's my user, here's what they can and can't do. But there's that extra layer here where we're kind of implementing roles here that makes a lot of flexibility, especially as you get into these external authentication providers. So let's take an example. Let's say we have three roles here, a role, another role, and while such role. And so those are three distinct roles that we have. Now, in this example, we have a user over here, and that user has two different roles. They have a role and another role. Then we have a second user, and that user has two roles as well. So they have another role and while such role. Now, behind each role is a series of permissions. In this case, a role has permission A, B, and C, and another role has permissions C, D, and E. So one thing to note here is that there is an overlap between the permissions. Now, permissions is not something that you're going to see like specifically defined here. This is just an example. So permissions in this case could mean access to a cluster. It could mean more specific things as far as like field level or document level access control. So they can mean a variety of different things. So it doesn't directly tie back those permissions to specific roles, right? So it doesn't mean that a role has any monopoly on permissions A, B, and C. Then if we take a look at the permissions that are granted through while such role, it has E, F, and G. And again, we have overlap between these. So this allows you to kind of assign these different roles to the different users and give them different roles based on their needs. So if we take a look at the user on the top here, they would have permission A, B, C, D, and E. granted through roles, a role and another role, and then permissions for the user on the bottom would have C, D, E, F, and G. So you can see there's overlap significantly between their two user roles, but they have that kind of different role there. So, and just as if we could have while such role to have permission A as well, that would also grant that to both users, or grant it to the bottom user, and the top user would have permission A through a different role. So this is something that's really core to understanding this. So I mentioned this a little bit before, but roles are for both data and management. So you can have cluster management roles, right? So these are things that are allowing the cluster to be able to do different things. So in this case, it's not necessarily about data, but about how the cluster is, the states of the cluster, right? So the other thing would be about data access. And that is what we're going to spend a lot of time on today. So this is more about how these different users are seeing the data as it comes in, and it's really powerful. So there's a few different levels of it, but before we get into that, we need to spend some time talking a little bit about how the sample we're going to use for this. So let's do that now. So here we have a sample document. As I mentioned before, a lot of this is done purely through a REST interface, and so this is nothing unique to security the security plugin. So if we take a look at this, we are going to be putting into an index. So our index name is a secure index in this example, and it has a document, and that document is doc123. So that's a unique identifier for that document in the index. So our document payload here is JSON and has two fields in it: a name, search emacs search face, and an address 123 45th Street Northwest, Edmonton, Alberta. So a couple notes on that. Search emacs search face, by the way, is my my handle on the forums, which we'll talk to about a little bit later. So that's me, and I don't live at 123 45th Street. I just wanted to get a kind of generic address that would be memorable for you. So looking at this, let's take a look at user access. So if a user was to try to do this, and right now I don't have a user created, but I'm going to attempt to access that. So I am going to create a request to port 9200, which happens to be the port in which OpenSearch is answering on. I'm going to ask for a secure index and doc ID 123. This is the same as we saw on the previous slide. Because I am using the security module, two things are different here than what you would see without it. We're using an HTTPS, and we are passing a user and a password in. In this case, I'm going to put the I switch on curl just so I get back the status code. So my response here would be unauthorized, because right now there is no way to authorize for the user Kyle because we haven't created it yet. So let's go ahead and take some time to create the user. So right now we're going to do this, and we're going to do a put request to the same. By the way, I'm using this as the admin user, so it's important to note, and I'm omitting the port number and stuff like this. This would be using effectively OpenSearch dashboards in the dev console to do this, but you could do this from curl, for example. So underscore open distro, that's just kind of the namespace, underscore security, /API/internal users. So we're using the basic auth here. And then Kyle is the user that I'm going to be modifying. And I'm going to set a password here to pass1234. Now, what's going to happen is the server is going to respond back with created, and it said, hey, I created Kyle. So this would only be able to be done as an admin user. Now, when I say admin user, this is just a shorthand for saying, it has the appropriate permissions to do this. When you create a OpenSearch cluster with security in it, it will automatically create an admin user, literally called admin, but you don't have to use that. You can assign it to anybody. So we've created our user. Let's try our curl again. the same thing that we had before. We're passing a username in. And remember, we said they couldn't do it before. We got a 401. Let's see what happens now. Slightly different. We're getting a 403 forbidden. Now, what's happened here? I created a user. I set the password. All that's correct. But instead of getting the 401, I'm getting a 403. So the difference here is OpenSearch is identifying that there is a user at that name and password, and that that's successful, but that thing you're trying to access, which is a secure index, is inaccessible. So let's actually look at the body that's being returned back. Now, the other one a few slides back where we got the 401, that didn't return anything. It didn't return much at all. So now let's take a look at this. Now, this is a little bit of an eye chart. Apologies for that, but it's very useful. If you take a look at this, you can see it says no permissions for, and it gives you the type of permission that you're trying to do with the user. And you can see it's got a little bit of more information here. So we could not read that data. And so it's returning a 403. So let's go ahead and actually change some things. Let's get rid of our old user and let's create another user that has that information that we want in it. So two things that are going on here. We're using the same method as before, using an admin user. And what we're doing with this is we are creating a role first, right? So instead of creating that user, we're going to create that role first, and then we'll attach it to a user. So this role looks at it and says, okay, here are the permissions that I'm giving for it. The pattern here, a secure, and we have the wildcard symbol, the asterisk. So a secure index, which if you look back on this, we were looking at a secure index, would follow that pattern. Additionally, it would follow it's like a secure index 2 or a secure set of data. Anything that follows that pattern would work. And we're going to give it an allowed action of read. Okay, so that's one of the things that you can do with it. It's going to respond back. This was created, and this is saying I created the role. So we don't have a user that this is attached to just yet. So we'll need to do that. So now we're going to actually take the time to create a user with that role. So here what we're doing, we have the same pathway that we did previously, but we're giving this Open Distro Security role Secure Reader, which is what we created in the last slide. You can see here, there's the Secure Reader, and then I'm using that in the Open Distro Security role. Now notice that this is an array, so we can add more roles to it, just as that diagram showed. So the response back on this is, hey, I created Kyle. Great. Now, let's actually take a look at what would happen when we try to access with that role. Now, this is the same exact curl statement that we had a few slides back that was giving us first a 401 and then a 403. So we got the 401 when that user didn't exist. We got the 403 when the user existed, but it did not have access to that particular index. So here we're getting a 200 and okay, everything's good. So you can see what's happened. We haven't really changed what we're passing into it. We're changing its ability because of the role that's being assigned to the user. Now, when we go to the user access with the role, this is what's being returned back from that previous curl statement. So the body of this, we can see we have the same document we had before with my name and my fictional address. So it was successful. Now, it's not just a binary. I think that's where people think, okay, good, I can deal with this. But there's a lot more options that are available. Let's take a look at something called data masking. Data masking prevents the exposure of sensitive data. It has some other advantages as well in that it's able to show that that exists without divulging it. So you define this on a role. So this is not something you define on a user, but you define on a role. It's not something you define on an index, but you define on a role and how that role gives access to that index. So the values are hashed, but it still returns back the name of the property or the name of the item that you're looking at. So let's take a look at what that might be. So the first thing that we're going to do, oh, by the way, it can be used in patterns. So you could say any fields that look like something else, just like we did with the other one. So let's go ahead and take a look at how it would work. So we're going to create the role, same way we did before. I've omitted a lot of this just for visibility's sake. And we have put in the index permission this masked fields. And I'm going to mask the address property. So you can see here, it's all the same. We're just adding some ellipses here to make it more readable. So when we create that role, we're going to get, great, this is created. We can make an assumption that we deleted it before. It would give you a slightly different thing if you're updating a role and be slightly different in a couple of ways, but the same applies. Now, when we access that data, so using the same exact way we did with curl and all this, what we're going to see is that instead of giving the address as 123 45 Street, you're going to get this hashed value. So super useful for making sure that anybody who's querying it, if there is sensitive data in there, it's not being divulged. Now, this may not be things that are sensitive from a perspective of like an address. That's a pretty low risk thing, but it's personally identifiable, so maybe it is. But it could be things that are very sensitive, so things like social security numbers or something along those lines that maybe you don't want to store. But this way, at least you're not divulging it to those who have query access. So that's all up to you how you define that. But it can be anything, and in fact, a lot of folks would see this as being able to really control what is minimally needed, and I think that's a great model to go for. Now, field level security is something that's has some similar roles. You can include or exclude different fields from it, just as we were data masking previously. Now we can just say that these fields don't even exist from the perspective of the user. They still exist in the index, and maybe from other users' perspective, they do exist. Now, there is the option to include or exclude fields, and we'll get into how that looks in a moment. But you can basically say this is an allow list or a block list for fields. You define that on a role, just as you did with the field level masking or the data masking. And like I said before, it's as if the field didn't exist at all to the perspective of the user if it is being removed by field level masking. So let's first look at how you would include a specific one. So in this case, we have everything like we did before when we were creating that particular role, right? Like all that's the same, but instead of having data masking or field level masking rather, we have what's called FLS, field level security, and we're including address. Now, if you recall correctly on this, there's two fields in here. There was a name and an address, and this one we are going to include only address. So that is basically saying only address will be delivered to the user. All the other ones we drop. So if we had 20, it would only give you the address. We're going to get the same response back as we did before, and same caveat applies if you're updating versus creating a new role. It's going to be slightly different. Now, when we get this, we can see we do the same request to get the document. It's going to give you just the address. It has removed name. If you take a look at this, there is a different way that you can exclude different things. So the only difference in the way that we're articulating this is we're using the tilde symbol in front of that one field name. So that means that it will exclude address instead of including it, right? So if we had 20 fields here, it would exclude this one, as opposed to the other one, which would include the one. So we get the same message back, and then you can take a look at the results. We're getting the name back, so the address has been excluded. These are really powerful patterns, and if you start thinking about what you can do with these, as far as even from a search perspective, or even from a logging or metric standpoint, there are some really interesting things that you can do both patterns here. Now, document level security is different in its implementation. It uses the query DSL, which is kind of something built into OpenSearch to specify available matches. So, and again, you define it on a role. So the query DSL is way beyond the scope of this particular 1 hour session, but it will show you exactly how to do this, and there are lots of documentation on that that comes from years and years and years of this also being available in the preceding project as well. So if we take a look at this, there's a couple things I want to point out here. Again, this is the same as what we were doing before, but we can see that we're putting DLS, document level security, and then we have the query DSL in it. Now here's the real trick to this. Because we have effectively a string that is containing a JSON blob or a JSON series of values, you have to escape your double quotes in it. That's why it looks a little weird. Now, in this, what we're doing is we're going to actually say it has to match where the query is, the name is equal to Bob, right? So let's take a look at this. Found is false. So it didn't find searchy McSearch face. Because if you go back and look at this, the query here had to equal Bob. So it's a really important thing that you can do, and it's very powerful, frankly, because the query DSL, of course, is very powerful and can kind of give you, the entire access to a whole lot of features that maybe you wouldn't be able to have and articulate in any other way. Now, in this example, we did a lot of administration of security through the API. And I do that because I think that's the most straightforward way to explain this. However, you don't have to. The API, of course, is a really great way to do this and automate it and all sorts of things like that. I will say that when you get into complex rules, sending them through curl or even sending them through the dev tools inside of OpenSearch dashboards is really laborious, and it's a little error prone. So there is actually a facility in OpenSearch dashboards where you can kind of point and click your way to this. I think it's actually a little bit more confusing to do it that way. Like I said, I've been around this sort of thing for a long time, so I'm more apt to go to my keyboard than use my trackpad. But to each their own. If somebody doesn't ever want to touch an API, you can certainly administer this through OpenSearch dashboards. So let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit and give you an overview of how security and special user and access roles work. Let's back up a little bit and talk about how you can contribute to OpenSearch and how you can get involved. So contribution is something that's incredibly important to us. We really want to get as many people contributing to this project as possible. And as a consequence, we want people to be involved in it as well. Generally, the team thinks that this is something that will make us make better software. We are looking, and in fact, we rely upon an engaged and active base of contributors, whether that contribution is as simple as giving a thumbs up on GitHub, or it goes way beyond that into things like submitting your own plugin or your own feature to the organization. So let's take a look at how you can do that and where everything is. OpenSearch project is our GitHub. That's our organization. We have 2 pinned repos, and that's OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards. That's what people are looking for the most often. Now, there are lots and lots of other repos in this, and that's the plugins and tools that really support and round out the features of OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards. Those are generally split in 2, just as OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards is split. So if it doesn't say anything about it, in this case I'm using the example of our anomaly detection plugin, that is what correlates to OpenSearch, and then OpenSearch anomaly detection dashboards plugin is the user interface that's available in OpenSearch dashboards. The reason we split them is because 2 different teams generally work on them. Super interesting, but really great way to split that up, because they are so different in how they're involved, how they're not involved, how they're developed. Now, getting involved with this through GitHub is only one way to do this. We have opensearch.org, which is our website. Please take a look at that. You'll find on there a link to our forums. Our forums are really a great place to get to know other people in it and have longer form conversations that would really make sense on GitHub. We think our GitHub issues and PRs are really for about technical implementation and facilitating uh, the open source process, but there is a lot more that those don't really facilitate. So longer form communication and less focused communication should go on the forums. We have a blog that we're going to maintain. We're bringing over a lot of the stuff in from Open Distro, one of the preceding projects, into our blog, and then we'll also be doing lots of new blog posts about OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards, and then all the plugins. And we'll be posting any news that we have. And we also have an events section where we'll be posting different events that might be related to OpenSearch or OpenSearch dashboards. Now, one thing I do want to talk a little bit about is our community meeting. Now, we're in a weird time right now with COVID and the pandemic, so meeting in person is not a great idea at the moment. In place of that, we do have biweekly community meetings every 2 weeks, and those are on an open Zoom. So the format for that is we have a couple of presentations that we generally do, and then we have a question and answer session where it's not only for you to ask questions of the team that's working on it, both inside and outside of Amazon, but also to ask questions among each other. So users can ask questions of users. And we've had some really productive meetings that have brought users together and brought people who have common interests together as well on this. So I think it's really important to understand, open source is not just about code, it's about communication as much. So the community meetings are a great place for that to happen. Well, that's all I got, folks. I really want to thank you for spending the time with me today to talk about this. So please do keep in contact. My contact information is on the screen right now. And like I said, and you saw in the presentation today, on the forums, I am Searchy McSearchface. I only slightly regret having that as my handle, but it's great. Please do contact me. I'm always willing to talk about OpenSearch. So thanks for your time.